I have tricks in my pocket. I have things up my sleeve, but I am the opposite of the stage magician. He gives you illusion that has the appearance of truth. I give you truth in a pleasant disguise of illusion. I take you back to an alley in St. Louis. The time, that quaint period when the huge middle class of America was matriculating from a school for the blind. Their eyes had failed them, or they had failed their eyes, and so they were having their fingers pressed forcibly down on the fiery braille alphabet of a dissolving economy. In Spain there was revolution. Here there was only shouting and confusion and labor disturbances, sometimes violent, in otherwise peaceful cities such as Chicago, Detroit, and Cleveland. That is the social background of this play. The play is memory. Being a memory play, it is dimly lighted. It is sentimental. It is not realistic. In memory, everything seems to happen to music. That explains the fiddle in the wings. I am the narrator of the play and also a character in it. The other characters in the play are my mother, Amanda, my sister, Laura, and a gentleman caller who appears in the final scenes. He is the most realistic character in the play, being an emissary from a world that we were somehow set apart from. But having a poet's weakness for symbols, I am using this character as a symbol, as the long-delayed but always expected something that we live for. There is a fifth character who doesn't appear other than in a photograph hanging on the wall. When you see the picture of this grinning gentleman, please remember this is our father who left us a long time ago. He was a telephone man who fell in love at long distance. So he gave up his job with the telephone company and skipped the light fantastic out of town. The last we heard of him was a picture postcard from the Pacific coast of Mexico, containing a message of 2 words: hello, goodbye, and no address. After the fiasco at Rubican's Business College, the idea of getting a gentleman caller for my sister Laura began to play a more and more important part of my mother's calculations. It became an obsession, like some archetype of the universal unconscious. The image of the gentleman caller haunted our small apartment. An evening at home rarely passed without some allusion to this image, this specter, this hope. And even when he wasn't mentioned, his presence hung in my mother's preoccupied look and in my sister's frightened, apologetic manner. It hung like a sentence passed upon the Wingfields. But my mother was a woman of action as well as words. She began to take logical steps in the planned direction. Late that winter and in the early spring, realizing that extra money would be needed to properly feather the nest and plume the bird, she began a vigorous campaign on the telephone, roping in subscribers to one of those magazines for matrons called The Homemaker's Companion, the type of journal that features the serialized sublimations of ladies of letters who think in terms of delicate cup-like breasts, slim, tapering waist, rich, creamy thighs, eyes like wood smoke in autumn, fingers that soothe and caress like soft strains of music, bodies as powerful as an Etruscan sculpture. Across the alley was the Paradise Dance Hall. Evenings in spring, they'd open up all the doors and windows and the music would come outside. Sometimes they'd turn out all the lights except for a large glass sphere that hung from the ceiling. It would turn slowly about and filter the dusk with delicate rainbow colors. Then the orchestra would play a waltz or a tango, something that had a slow and sensuous rhythm. The young couples would come outside to the relative privacy of the alley. You could see them kissing behind ash pits and telephone poles. This was the compensation for lives that passed like mine, without change or adventure. Changes and adventure, however, were imminent this year. They were waiting around the corner for all these dancing kids, suspended in the mist over Birch Test Garden, caught in the folds of Chamberlain's umbrella. In Spain there was Guernica. Here there was only hot swing music and liquor, dance halls, bars, movies, and sex that hung in the gloom like a chandelier and flooded the world with brief, deceptive rainbows. While these unsuspecting kids danced to Dear One, the World is Waiting for the Sunrise, all the world was really waiting for? Bombardments. And so the following evening, I brought Jim home to dinner. I had known Jim slightly in high school. In high school, Jim was a hero. He had tremendous good nature and vitality with the scrubbed and polished look of white chinaware. He seemed to move in a continual spotlight. He was a star in basketball, captain of the debating club, president of the senior class and the glee club, and he sang the male lead in the annual light opera. He was forever running or bounding, never just walking. He seemed always just at the point of defeating the law of gravity. He was shooting with such velocity through his adolescence that you would just logically expect him to arrive at nothing short of the White House by the time he was 30. But Jim apparently ran into more interference after his graduation from high school because his speed had definitely slowed. And so, at this particular time in our lives, he was holding a job that wasn't much better than mine. He was the only one at the warehouse with whom I was on friendly terms. I was valuable to Jim as someone who could remember his former glory, who had seen him win basketball games and the Silver Cup in debating. He knew of my secret practice of retiring to a cabinet of the washroom to work on poems whenever business was slack in the warehouse. He called me Shakespeare. And while the other boys in the warehouse regarded me with suspicious hostility, Jim took a humorous attitude toward me. Gradually, his attitude began to affect the other boys and their hostility wore off. And so, after a time, they began to smile at me too, as people smile at some oddly fashioned dog that trots across their path at some distance. I knew that Jim and Laura had known each other in high school because I had heard my sister Laura speak admiringly of Jim's voice. I didn't know if Jim would remember her or not, because in high school, Laura had been as unobtrusive as Jim had been astonishing. And if he did remember Laura, it was not as my sister. For when I asked him home to dinner, he smiled and said, "You know, a funny thing, Shakespeare. I never thought of you as having folks." Well, he was about to discover that I did. I didn't go to the moon. I went much farther, for time is the longest distance between two places. I left St. Louis. I descended these steps of this fire escape for the last time and followed, from then on, in my father's footsteps, attempting to find in motion what was lost in space. I traveled around a great deal. The city swept about me like dead leaves, leaves that were brightly colored but torn away from the branches. I would have stopped, but I was pursued by something. It always came upon me unawares, taking me altogether by surprise. Perhaps it was a familiar bit of music. Perhaps it was only a piece of transparent glass. Perhaps I am walking along a street at night in some strange city before I found companions, and I passed the lighted window of a shop where perfume is sold. The window is filled with pieces of colored glass, tiny transparent bottles in delicate colors, like bits of a shattered rainbow. Then all at once, my sister touches my shoulder. I turn around and look into her eyes. "Oh, Laura, Laura, I tried to leave you behind me, but I am more faithful than I intended to be." I reach for a cigarette, I cross the street, I run into a movie or a bar, I buy a drink, I speak to the nearest stranger, anything that can blow your candles out. For nowadays, the world is lit by lightning. Blow out your candles, Laura. And so, goodbye.